Hello, everyone, and welcome in to crushthestreet.com. I got a very special guest on the line with me today. His name is Marin Katusa. I'm sure many of you know who this man is. He's with KatusaResearch.com. He's a best-selling author and someone who hasn't been afraid to call it like he sees it, and he's been right time and time again. One of the smartest investors in the world. And he's a top performing fund manager, top performing in the resource sector. And he puts serious skin in the game. He partners with his subscribers at the same prices that they are paying. And, he knows the smartest people in the industry. And if you want an edge in investing, Marin Katusa is definitely the one to follow. Marin, thanks for coming on the show with me today.
It's a pleasure, Kenneth.
Marin, I would love to get your rags to riches story, kind of just how you got started. It's a very interesting thing. And, for people who might have heard this before or people who are just getting to know you, I mean, this is so powerful and kind of sets the stage for who you are today.
Sure. I started out, I'm born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, which is, I guess the one lucky part of my story is Vancouver for multiple decades has been the epicenter of financings for the resource sector, similar to how Silicon Valley is the financing sector for tech stocks. That's what Vancouver is for mining stocks. So that comes into later in the story. Went to university on an academic scholarship for math and sciences. Realized really quickly that I didn't want to do my PhD in math, so one of the profs convinced me to become a teacher. I enjoyed it, but I was really more interested as investing. And by fluke, through teaching, actually, one of his sons was in my calculus class. I taught him calculus. That's from high school math. I got into teaching post-secondary calculus, and I met a guy named James Robertson that I wrote all this research on tungsten. So my first foray into the resource sector was tungsten, and I've written about the story and how volatile and how you have to play it, and the mistakes I made early on. Even though, through all the research, I explain to people a lot that I spent the first 10 years of my life learning how to find the best stocks, and then I spent another 10 years learning when to buy those best stocks. And that's the other aspect I talk about in my newsletter is, finding the right stock and management team is one thing, but how to accumulate your position and when to do so is an entirely different framework and mindset. So I became kind of the tungsten guru in the industry, and I was doing a lot of ghostwriting for a lot of the newsletters. I didn't even know the newsletter industry existed. I had to sign CAs with a lot of these guys, and later on these guys became subscribers of mine, which is kind of an interesting tale to it all. And I even manage some of their money in my fund. So it's an interesting story from, starting out as a keen, eager beaver, young kid in the industry to traveling to over 100 countries, becoming one of the largest financiers in the industry. I talk about my mistakes. I talk about what I learned from them and my framework and how to build your position. And, that's part of the Katusa matrix, I call it, how to ease into a position. And, so that's where it is today, and why I'm so excited about the resource sectors. We've had some massive wins in our newsletter, and I do believe we're going to have a few more here shortly because of the framework. If you have a world-class deposit run by the right people, and if you look at the management's cost base, you want to make sure that they have skin in the game, and what cost base is their skin in the game. And if you can now buy a world-class deposit at a cheaper price than what the management have bought their price in because they've been in the story for 10 years, and now the story is 10 years more advanced, that is how you make a fortune in the resource game. We just did it in our newsletter with Nevsa, a huge win for us. Altera Power, and I have a couple of more that I think are going to be big, big winners. And that's how you do it. Nobody's talking about this sector. So in a way, I have an advantage over everybody right now because I'm not competing with all these big funds because they're out in Silicon Valley or chasing the big FANG stocks. There's not many players left in the resource games, but the majors are buying world-class deposits. A friend of mine, Richard Rourke, just sold his zinc deposit today for $1.75 billion. And this was a stock that a year ago you could have bought at $1. So that's where we are at the industry right now.
Yeah, that is a very interesting thing. And talking more, I guess, on a macro level, optics wise, the mainstream perspective, the economy is good. And especially as it pertains to resource stocks, gold really hasn't stood out in a large way here. I mean, now we're below $1,300 here decisively. So I'd like to get your thoughts on gold and, how you see it going forward here, and especially as it pertains to the resource sector.
As I wrote in my newsletter for the last many months, gold is going to have downward pressure because I believe the US dollar is going to do strong, and that's music to my ears. Now, why? I tell everybody that, look, you never buy all your position at once, and this provides us a situation, a framework where world-class deposits are trading at a big discount, and it's almost like you got to take a different perspective. You want to buy a Ferrari for the price of a Kia. Everybody fantasizes about that. But that's where we are in resources right now, but people are scared of that situation. But that's exactly what we're doing, and that's what I say to people. I'm buying this stock at this price. It's up to you if you want to follow my advice. My newsletter is kind of like a personal investment journal, and I take my film crew with me. I have a studio in Vancouver where you get to see what I see when I go on a site visit. I'm leaving on my next one in about 3 hours from my office here. And I explain to people that, you don't want to be buying when it's popular. You don't want to be buying when, it's on the front page, gold going to 2,000. That's when you want to start selling to the masses. Right now, you're accumulating, and that's how you build significant wealth. So what do I see for the next 6 months? Further downward pressure on these gold prices. And that's the beauty. You don't, in today's market, Kent, what I'm trying to explain, and my subscribers have seen it, I don't need to take exploration risk in this market. And so much of the junior resource sector is run by geologists. And the fact is, geologists are horrible businessmen. That's a fact. And I know the geologists hate when I say this, but really think about this. You want to invest in a businessman. And in this sector right now, why do I need to go pay $30 million for an idea when I could go and buy a drilled out deposit that has seen $100 million worth of work trading at 10 cents on the dollar, and build your position, and eventually, if it's a world-class deposit in the lowest cost quartile and is economic at $1,200 gold or $250 copper, the majors will buy it out. We're seeing it right now. We saw that through Nevsun. My thesis and framework played out to a T. It's happening, but you have to be, you got to have some testicular fortitude. You got to have some patience, and you got to do your due diligence. And when you bet right, sit tight.
I like that. Bet right, sit tight. All right, Marin. Well, it's kind of interesting, and I just ask you this one last follow-up on gold here. We're seeing a reversal of the rising interest rates and gold making new highs. We saw that largely up until the last rate hike, and this time gold has come down, and that goes along with the dollar getting stronger. So just any follow-up on what you said there, and maybe anything in relation to rising interest rates and inflation and things going forward.
For sure. So you look at technology and software being applied has been a deflationary event. And the miners are slowly catching up to the oil sector because, let's face it, look at the fracking revolution, how it turned the world's international oil markets upside down. Not only did it make oil cheaper, it's really changed geopolitics significantly and infrastructure significantly. So using that framework, we're starting to see new technologies be applied to existing mines, number one. Number two, what people have to realize is they're looking in the rearview mirror in the gold markets. They're saying, yeah, 1978. Well, guess what? In 1978 or 1981, they didn't have the paper market that we have today in these massive ETFs and these index funds. So all these gold mining companies now, maybe they shouldn't be selling all the gold they produce, but they're having so much pressure on themselves from these index funds or ETFs that they're selling into a market where people forget that China is actually the world's largest gold producer, not America, not Russia, and they don't sell any gold into the international market, whereas the American producers sell all of it. The Chinese producers sell to the Chinese government. The opposite's not true in America or Canada. Hell, Canada, with our leader, Mr. Dressup, he sold all the gold. Canada has no gold in their Fed. At least the Americans have some gold. Now, there's an argue how much gold, but at least you have something. Canada has nothing. So If you look at the trade sanctions and what's going on globally, the US dollar will do well for the next few months, and that will put pressure on commodities because it's priced in US dollars. But you see, the junior market is a derivative to the gold market. Just because the gold price moves up 20%, that doesn't mean these juniors should move up 20%. In fact, 95% of these juniors are worthless because they don't have any gold. So focus on the best management teams with world-class deposits, and you'll just do fine, regardless of whether gold's 1,200 or 1,400. That price really makes no difference to most juniors.
Marin, you mentioned something that I think is significant, and I'd love for you to just kind of give the underlying meaning of what you think is happening here, and that is the West doesn't own gold or is disparaging it, and the East, such as China, is hoarding it and values gold. Is this signaling any sort of shift of purchasing power down the line from West to East? Are you seeing that or predicting that in any way?
I talked about it in my book, and you got to include Russia in that context also. Eventually, what you'll see is you see how the Russians are willing to trade their natural gas for yuan. You're going to see further countries as the dynamic of the petrodollar has changed, and a fundamental aspect in my book was what is understanding the petrodollar. The Americans print dollars, give the dollars for oil, and guarantee protection to those producers. Well, now America is becomes the world's largest oil producer through fracking. The dynamics of the petrodollar is changing, and we're seeing a gradual shift where now China is rising, what I call the G2. You got America and China, and then its subsidiaries, its allies, the Russians. What is going on in the rest of the China matrix where the countries are willing to take the yuan? And that's going to be a real change where, to this point, it's really been the US dollar. The euro now is out of context. The Chinese aren't going to trade oil in the euro. It's going to be in yuan. And we've seen over the last decade where the West has become societies of wealth redistribution. And the East, the emerging markets, are becoming societies of wealth creation. So our governments want to tax guys who are working hard, the people, and distribute to those who do not, almost like a socialist aspect, where in China, it's respectful to want to be rich. You are respected if you are rich, where in the West, you're looked down upon for that. So we're really, and you can see the gold trade really signifies that. And you ask most of the people in the West, whether in Europe, France, you go to France, England, go to America, they don't think about gold as something you should have. They think that the government should take care of them regardless of what happens. Well, guess what? In the East, they don't think that the government should take care of them. They believe they should take care of themselves, and hence why gold isn't just important from a government standpoint, it's important from the citizen standpoint.
Wow. Yeah, personal individual sovereignty, that's a powerful thing. Marin, so I'd love to just get your thoughts on this and kind of give you a blank slate. Here with the mainstream news outlet, it's nonstop coverage on how Trump is colluding with Russia, colluding with Putin. With the intense amount of research that you've done on Russia, I mean, is Putin that bad of a guy? And is there massive conspiracies and collusions going on between Trump and Putin, in your opinion?
So the question you have to ask is which perspective. In our media, in the Western media, Putin is painted as a criminal. He is painted as someone who is manipulating the media in our context. But if you go to within Russia, here's the irony. He's a hero. He will be compared to Peter the Great when the record books come down. Yet, if you just do a quick Google search from the West, he's seen as, almost like a thug, a buffoon. Nothing could be farther from the truth. What Vladimir Putin is doing is moving and advancing through his strong leadership skills and consolidating power. Look, Putin hasn't been the nicest guy to certain oligarchs. You look at Khodorkovsky. Khodorkovsky was trying his own agenda, and it conflicted with Putin's agenda, but Putin's moving over the internal policy, and he solidified power. And remember, what people have to put into context, Russia was a broken power when Putin took over. It was broken. Just a few years earlier, it defaulted on its debt. It got defeated in a minor skirmish. You had NGOs manipulating the market. So from a Russian standpoint, Putin has brought back, in the majority, not everyone, but in the majority, pride to be Russian again. Now, is there significant collusion? Look, obviously there's something going on. There's no secret there's been past investments with Russians and links directly to the Trump organization. But, a lot of people have to remember, did Trump really think he was either going to win, or was this more of a advertising campaign? In the last chapter of my book, I talked about America's failed foreign policy. And either they continue on the failed foreign policy, or a leader will be elected that will be so contrast to what America's had before. It could go either way. And I never thought, when I wrote this in 2013, I never thought that it would be Trump, but I wrote about the character. And if you go back to my book, it actually fits the narrative. Trump, it's not like there's a behind-the-scenes secret. I don't believe that. But look, government leaders across the board have all sorts of agreements and acknowledgments. But Trump, in his own way, will pivot if it's in the best interest of what his policy will be at the time. But I think the key point, and the final point I'll mention this, is Trump, more so than any other leader, will pivot and change his point faster than any other politician in America's history, because Trump thinks of it as a business decision. And good business leaders, if you make a mistake, or a good fund manager, if you make a wrong bet, you got to stop that bet and reverse your trade as quickly as possible. And I think Trump is going with his foreign policy in the same context.
Wow. Well, and that's actually a positive thing, because when you're flexible, you're willing to adjust, as opposed to holding on to your belief because of embarrassment and pride, which is, I think, something that a lot of leaders do, and it's to the detriment of the followers in so many situations, which is an interesting point you brought up.
And one thing Trump has had more so than any other leader is the anti-Trump media, because he is so different. He is so selective to who he wants to talk to. And that annoys journalists who have an agenda. And that's interesting about how the far left has really been a loud voice, where no other presidential leader has seen that type. But no other presidential leader has been in the social media the way Trump has been also. So, it's an interesting uncharted territory where we are today.
Well, and just a complete side note regarding Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin did say, in regards to artificial intelligence, whoever leads an artificial intelligence will rule the world. I know that's something we've been really talking a lot about here at Crush the Street, and just kind of the direction things are going with AI. And it's interesting that he put that out there and understands that. Marin, so I'd like to shift to uranium. This is something that you've covered and you've been spot on with in many ways. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the investment and where you see it going forward here. It's still largely depressed, considering where it was pre-Fukushima. So what are your thoughts here?
So you've known me for many years, and I speak where I put my money. And in the uranium market, I gave the keynote in the 2015 World Nuclear Fuels Market in Paris. That's where all the traders and utilities, so the producers, the traders, and the utilities that actually consume the uranium, all get together from every country in the world. And they asked me to give the keynote. And I said, look, guys, uranium's $42. It's going to go to 30, and it's probably going to touch 20. I never saw it going to $17, but I did say it'd get to 20. And at that point, the audience just looked at me like I was a madman. And I talked about all of the reasons why. And here we are now, 3 years later. The World Nuclear Fuels Market just wrapped up 2 weeks ago. And my thesis is playing out, where you don't need to own assets where the Chinese or the Russians have influence. Now, remember, the Russians control half of all the enrichment capacity in the world, because it was built up from the Soviets. The Soviets were really pushing nuclear back in the day. So where are we today? anything that needs a big capex, avoid. Anything that has foreign influence from either the Chinese, the Kazis, or the Russians, stay away. But the irony is you can make a fortune. Again, I don't need exploration risk in this market. These assets have been drilled out. I've been to every single producing deposit in the U.S. I've met and sat with all the management. And back then in 2014, I sat with every management team and said, guys, the market's going to go way lower. Pull back your production. You're depleting your best resources in a bad market. You know what some of these presidents would say? But Marin, I told all the bankers I was going to produce. I go, basically what you're telling me is you're an idiot. None of these bankers care because they're going to be on the next trade. You're depleting your reserves, and bringing in a uranium mine is much more difficult, time-consuming, and expensive than any other commodity because it's radioactive. So what would normally take 5 to 10 years could take 25, 30 years because it's radioactive. So where are we today? In my newsletter, we're up in all our new uranium picks, and I am publishing in the next one a story that has never been published before. And it's one of these stocks that wins if uranium stays low, and it does even better if uranium goes up, which I expect over the next few years. I want to get paid while I hold a stock in this market, and that's where I am in the current framework where I'm at. I'm telling all my subscribers, this is the price I'm paying. You get in at the same price at the same time as me. And I love being the first to a story. It's what I pride myself in the industry, and that's where I'm at right now. I can't emphasize enough. You don't need 25 uranium stocks. You just need a few in your portfolio, and if you pick right, sit tight, you'll do very well.
Powerful stuff, Marin. Marin, I'd love for you to give some concluding thoughts here. I think this is a good spot to just kind of wrap up the interview. It was a pleasure having you on the show. If people would like to learn more about you or just get some more information on what you're doing, let them know where they can go, and also some concluding thoughts on how to approach 2018, the latter half of 2018 here.
I published many months ago in my newsletter, the Katusa Resource Opportunities. You just go to my website, katusaresearch.com, and my framework is playing out. I said how the US dollar will do well, commodities will have a further pressure, and that's music to my ears if you're positioning yourself to that. I put tens of millions of dollars into this market, and watch what I'm doing. You don't need to buy every stock, but here are the stocks at my cost base. And in the last 6 months, I've had 2 big buyouts. I expect within the next 6 months, I'll have 2 more positions that are very big for me, multi $10 million positions. And my subscribers are in at the same price. And what do I see moving forward? The same thing. Position yourself in world-class deposits that have been de-risked. I don't need to go find more uranium. I don't need to find more gold or copper. A lot has been found. You just need to find the world-class deposits that the majors will want, for example, in NEPSUN or in the green energy sector like Altera, which was a big win for my subscribers, and position yourself slowly through the Katusa matrix. And then I alert my subscribers how to take a Katusa free ride. The absolute key to resource speculation is risk mitigation. It's about taking all the risk off the table. And one day, Doug Casey, a world famous speculator, best-selling author, he was my mentor, he was my boss. Today I manage all his money in the resource sector. And he asked me, he goes, Marin, what is your ideal portfolio? And I said, a portfolio full of Katusa free rides, meaning zero principal because I've sold enough to keep all the stock for free. And that's where I'm taking my portfolio, and I want to bring all my subscribers on the ride.
Powerful stuff. Marin, it was a pleasure having you on crushthestreet.com. Thank you so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure. Take care of yourself.